It is interesting to think how crafty people would get with sneaking booze into events.
Oh,
Like, our great close personal friend of the show, Cassio Kidd, once took a girl to a football game on a date. And, they had been to bars and concerts and, they had been out before. So she knew what he drank. And she snuck liquor in a very special way.
yeah.
I'd never heard of that. And I got a text and I'm like, I didn't even know you could do that. Why did that never? Wow. Okay.
So sandwich baggies. That was another thing that I just like do what, because you pat it down in those like the snow skiing jackets that they have all the different kind of pockets. Oh well, there's one in here up around the neck because they never thought of that. But the whole neck would be full of
Booze.
yes.
It's unbelievable.
So you
It's
pat them
unbelievable.
down. Yeah, that's the old thing. If you want it bad enough, you'll figure it out how to get it in there. And I'm sure the good old folks in Memphis on Beale Street, they figured it out.
Jim Ross got on the 900 line and defended the decision to end the show early and said it was a decision made by company management, not Sean and Hunter. And quote, the safety of the performers and the fans comes first. It's sad a certain small segment of ignorant drunks ruin the show for everybody else. We mentioned that there's people protesting the next day. They all want refunds. If you're wondering, the company does come back to Memphis, but it's Valentine's Day, St. Valentine's Day Massacre in February of 99 before we get back. The next day, though, you're in Little Rock. Jeff, tell me about your trip to Little Rock. I'm sure this was the talk of the boys on your way there.
Well, I'm trying to think. It was one of those deals because the card was different the next night. I'm just thinking through that run, but it wasn't as big a chatter of, hey, we didn't have a main event last night, because it was pretty, probably half the guys were gone because they were on to the next town. But it was pretty much, well, I would say the initial gut reaction of I'll call it the boys was, Memphis screwed themselves out of a main event, because that, look, did the paying customers, the majority? No, but the building and the security, and you can't really put it on one fan, but the domino effect, it did. It really cost them getting to see specifically that tag match. But it wasn't this monumental thing like, oh my God, that town's killed. It was pretty much Memphis screwed themselves out of a main event, on to the next show. Not really thinking anything that Little Rock was going to turn into Little Rock. But here we go.
Little Rock is even bigger. We had 5,070 out fans in Memphis. We've got 6,449 here in Little Rock. It's the very next day. We start the show with Kane versus Chains. And then we get The Undertaker beating Rocky Maivia in a non-title casket match. It lasts 2 minutes. Undertaker wants to get in and out here. Mark Merrow is going to beat Flash Funk. The Godwins are going to beat the Headbangers in a country whipping match. And then we've got Jarrett and Lawler versus Road Dogg and Billy Gunn. What do you remember about your tag match here, Jeff?
I mean, you can just imagine in this time frame, boy, I'd love to kind of see rosters of both companies, WCW and the WWF. But as far as over entertaining tag teams that can go, Brian and Billy weren't just good. They were absolutely great.
Well, they're not all the way there yet. They're still building. They're not quite the New Age Outlaws.
Are they in DX yet?
Well,
no, I don't think
it's going to really become a thing after WrestleMania in March. So we're a few months away from them getting the really big push.
Yeah, okay, and that's when they had Funk and
Foley in a cage. Yeah,
that's coming up in 3 or 4 months. Okay, so so they weren't as red hot from a character persona, but as far as in-ring ability, just fantastic. And again, I'm going to go back to, Lawler. It wasn't Memphis, but as we say, it was close. But just the kind of the wild card out of all of it was, me and him were both heels for the most part on WWF television. And so that was it didn't make it difficult, but it could have. But give credit to Brian and Billy to kind of establish who's heels and who's baby faces. And again, it wasn't Memphis. It wasn't in the main event. It wasn't Sean. So it was a different set of circumstances. But back to the crowd. It was just during this era that you just, Conrad, and I'm sure because you've done so many different podcasts from so many different angles. Prior to Hogan dropping the leg, was there any televised crap being thrown in the ring that you can think of? Was that the first night that went, whoa?
That's the most famous. Certainly it had happened here and there before, but
I don't think on a grand stage.
No. And if I'm honest with you, Eric Bischoff has said he loved it.
Yeah. No, to me, I don't want to get too dramatic here, but take out the fans' shock and awe and the trash in the ring, take all that out and just let it be booze. In my opinion, it's not even close to the same scene.
It's not the same. I agree. Hey, man, let's talk a little bit about the actual show here because Little Rock's much worse than Memphis. According to several reports, the undercard for the show at the Barton Coliseum was terrible, and even the densest marks were getting restless because of the poor quality of matches. There was a terrible match with Kane and Chains, and the Undertaker match with Rocky Maivia only lasted 2 minutes. Now, the Undertaker's injured here, and he's got high blood pressure that night, so they want him in and out, so he is. The main event that's been scheduled and advertised and promoted, though, is Ken Shamrock challenging Hunter Hearst Helmsley. In Helmsley's corner, he's going to have Chyna and Shawn Michaels. Ken Shamrock's going to have Danny Hodge. Well, as you may imagine, that doesn't happen. Here's what's written in the Observer. We're not clear in that was going to happen as we received a report that Helmsley was going to face Dude Love in the main event, although that may not have been correct since Dude had fractured ribs and was only supposed to make appearances and not wrestle. But since fans had no idea what was going to take place because everything had changed, my impression is that the show was stopped when Michaels and the rest of DX walked out, that neither Shamrock nor Hodge actually came out for the main event before the show ended. Michaels and Helmsley came to the ring and began riling up the crowd that was already mad about the poor undercard. Naturally, they became target practice again, and when a piece of paper hit Shawn Michaels, he told the crowd they just lost their main event and walked out with Helmsley and Chyna. Fans were thinking this was just part of an act and didn't react right away. But after several minutes, DX failed to come back to the ring. There was no opponent for Helmsley appearing, and the ring announcer had said they refused to come out, and the show was over. At this point, a real riot started, with chairs and whiskey bottles being thrown everywhere, including at police trying to get out of the building, or the crowd out of the building. The situation got so bad, the police had to spray the building with tear gas to get the fans outside. Several fans were trying to get refunds, and they were unsuccessful at that point. A second riot took place in the parking lot before the police broke it up. At least one fan was rushed to the hospital, but there didn't appear to be any serious injuries to fans either night. This incident was so out of hand that it was reported on the news later that night, and at least one report was giving the impression that the WWF wouldn't be allowed back in the city. Although this was all happening at deadline, so it's really too soon to figure out how this is going to unfold locally. The reports from this live event pointed the finger directly at Michaels for the problem starting, although the behavior of the fans was the real problem. But unlike in Memphis, the real problems didn't occur until the fans realized they weren't going to see the main event. And DX walking out simply wasn't part of the show to get heat. So let's talk about this. You've already wrestled with Lawler. Do you, after your match, pack your bags and leave? Or are you like, I don't know what's going to happen. I need to stick around for this?
I left before the very end. I got out of there. And you've already touched on this, but again, I want to kind of back up and give even as much context as possible. You touched on it, but as a performer during this era and the grind, this was the last night of the tour, right, Conrad? Yeah, I think
you're going to be off for 11 days after this.
Okay. Just the excitement in everyone's mind that we literally get to go home in the morning.
Yeah.
That tells me I put my butt on the road and was ready to get on I-40 and wasn't going to stop till I got to Hendersonville. like a lot of other guys. Probably might have in those days. Memphis was a much better airport than Little Rock. I assume we were kind of be based out of there. But Sean in the DX, and we've kind of touched on the era of everything. And look, Sean's not the same person today that he was during this time, but he was feeling every bit about of it. But the Hodge thing, and I know you hadn't got to it, that was what I'd love to ask JR now. JR, even though Sean might have wanted to do this, did we really think it's a good idea for the top heel to be in the ring with Danny? I mean, I don't know. It just is a little perplexing.
It's interesting to see too, how this escalates. We're not just throwing food and drinks or spitting, we're throwing chairs and lit firecrackers. Police are breaking up fights and scuffles, and they're arresting several fans for drunken, disorderly conduct. And just as DX is getting to the back, Hunter gets nailed in the face with a glass bottle. Hunter's eye is swollen badly the next day, and fans are pissed off that the show's ending early. So they start chanting WCW, WCW. Adam Duvall wrote into the Torch, and he said the fighting continued for like 30 minutes. He says, I went to Marilyn Manson a few weeks back. There was all this talk going into the show that he was going to eat children on stage and hand out drugs. So compared to the WWF show, the Manson concert was totally organized and safe. And Manson, they list everyone's shirts and check their bags. So it is interesting that he's comparing this to the Marilyn Manson show in the same market, I think in the same building, and say, boy, their security was on top of things. The WWF security, maybe not so much. David Wright, crowds were pelting Michaels with garbage, and that's become commonplace since he made his latest heel turn. But there were some situations where a show ended abruptly and a main event never took place. Although situations beforehand with Michaels and at some WCW house shows on the West Coast threatened to get to this level, and ECW has been having their fan problems on a regular basis of late, and they've come close on a few occasions from having a show stop before the main event. Now, we as fans, Jeff, we've heard that there used to be riots all the time in the territory days, like in Mid-South and things like that. But is this the first time you remember hearing shit like they used tear gas?
Is nuts. And yeah. Well, and the WCW, NWO, those kind of scenes, in a way, kind of became, oh, this is what we're supposed to do kind of deal. I don't know if that makes sense, but this coming off the heels of, it's hard it's hard to put into words and descriptions like the NWO angle, unless you were there that night at the Montreal Screwjob, it's hard to put into words and describe the feeling that was in the air. Just like for me, like when I hear about Saul Weingroff and the Interns, there's a couple of different heel tag teams that work the Tennessee territory that just they had, especially if they wanted to, riot after riot after riot. I can't really relate to that because I wasn't there. But on this set of circumstances, you just kind of think back, like, can you imagine, Conrad, like today in the sponsorship world, what a disaster this would be. But again, a different time, a different place, the Attitude Era, the raw emotion, like that scene of Brett taking that monitor and smashing it down and spitting on Vince. That was like water cooler talk going on right now. It wasn't, hey, did you hear what happened a couple of years ago? Or did you hear the podcast? Or did you hear, this kind of sit down interview? This was all kind of still the water cooler talk of the wrestling world, which got outside of the circles and the ratings and, hey man, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Dread Hot, and Hogan and the NWO and all that kind of stuff. And so to have riots in this era with tear gas in the parking lot, Conrad, it's just so bizarre. It's like a different world, but no, it really happened. It goes back to the beauty of our business, that Marilyn Manson, that was the quote unquote show, But oh, come over here to Memphis Memphis and Little Rock. Damn, Shawn Michaels, this is real. Like what?
We should mention that this is not a unique problem to the WWF or specifically to Shawn Michaels, because I just want to remind everybody on December 15th, which is the day of this Little Rock show, that's a Monday. So WCW Nitro is happening live in Charlotte. That same day, we have a fan try to slide in the ring and Macho Man has to stomp on him. Randy Anderson gets him. I mean, we've got fans jumping in the rings trying to start fights.
Anyway,
WCW officials come out and say that they're going to institute a policy similar to the NFL and NHL in certain concerts where they have like a last call at a certain point during the show. They're not just going to let them keep drinking all night. But that photo that ran in the Little Rock paper the day after the show, it's the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. And I mean, this photo looks like it's a war zone. It looks like it's out of a movie. Police are saying they arrested 12 people on misdemeanor alcohol charges, including 4 or 5 juveniles, and there was 1 disorderly conduct arrest. An athletic commission inspector said the WWF is not to blame. Quote, without question, the WWF did everything they could do to the match. They didn't provoke anybody that I saw. The big insult was when Danny Hodge, a wrestler from the old days of 50s and 60s, was being presented the Living Legend plaque. People were throwing things at him. Fans didn't show police or security people any respect. One guy was clinging to the rails. He wouldn't leave. Man, this is unbelievable.
But Conrad, I think both of us have kind of left this point out as well. You know, in the 70s, whether it was Dusty, the Von Erichs, just call the territories, 70s, 80s, top baby faces, Hulkamania, say your prayers, take your vitamins, all this. This is the era when the top baby face is, because I think NWO, but certainly the WWF, were anti-establishment.
Yes.
Basically, Stone Cold, the top merchandiser, the top seller, the guy was F you to your boss.
Yep.
And so that goes on the very, very tip top of it, that I'm coming to see a guy and I love him, but his whole persona is
anti-establishment, beer drinking, finger wagging. Yeah.
And so it's like doubling down on all of it.
It's written in the Observer. The World Wrestling Federation was forced into making a damned if you do, damned if you don't decision when crowds, apparently fueled by alcohol, became unruly, throwing things at wrestlers and creating a dangerous environment in both Memphis and Little Rock. Of course, we mentioned WCW had problems at Nitro as well, but one of the things they're going to switch around is they're going to have Shawn Michaels start wrestling before intermission. So that's the old Hogan spot where he would have the last match before intermission, and then we might announce a return date or something like that. Speaking of which, if you're wondering, the WWE did come back to Little Rock, but it was the year 2000. So it's over 2 years before they're back. What do you think of that decision? Let's just pivot and let's put Shawn on earlier. I mean, this isn't Shawn's fault, but if he's the one inciting the reaction, that's fine. As a reminder, we're acting like this is going to be a forever problem. Shawn's gone in 3 months anyway. It doesn't matter.
But also, we'll call it before intermission. I remember Arnie Skolin kind of got into the weeds with me, but and I don't know that he started this, but Bruno in the Garden, but all around the territory, they would put Bruno's main event title match. He didn't close the Garden shows, to my best of my knowledge, but they put, well, you said Hogan, but a lot of times they would put the main event on, and then the semi-main event would actually go on last. And I know way, way, way back on the curfew days is that they would put, I'll call it a middle card match, actually on last to let the people filter out. Now this, I think that's a 50s kind of deal, but putting Shawn in that slot, to me, was a huge stopgap solution. It just was. It on multiple levels.
It's interesting, and I wonder, like you said, how much of it was because Shawn wanted to be in there with Danny Hodge. Earlier in the show, they were going to do a special presentation to Hodge for reasons that make absolutely no sense, other than he simply wanted to do it and has the juice to do what he wants. Shawn Michaels asked to present the award to Hodge as the top star of the WWF today, forgetting that Michaels as a heel has been on television every week. And even though Hodge was probably the biggest wrestling star in the area at one point, it's been more than 20 years since he was regularly featured on TV. And forget the storyline that they're on opposite sides of the main event later in the show. Either way, Michaels talked agent Jack Lanza into doing it out of respect for Hodge and ignoring the storyline himself. Michaels felt his ability with words and to control the crowd would result in a dignified presentation, but it wound up being target practice, which made everyone associated with the show that grew up watching Hodge totally embarrassed that the fans would treat a 65-year-old two-sport Hall of Famer this way. It probably did wonders for Michaels' temperament later in the show. As DX went out for the main event, it was more target practice, and from later reports, we understand that Helmsley got something thrown at him that hit him in the eye hard enough that it started swelling badly. China was also hit in the back or neck with something enough that she too was hurt. Although Shawn didn't get hit with anything worse than paper, when Helmsley got nailed, he called it upon himself to call off the show. Shamrock never made an appearance, and Michaels never got to work his angle where he would put Hodge over. Hodge's participation would lead to Shamrock winning at the end, but of course that never happened. Problems were made worse when fans went to the box office demanding refunds since the main event never took place. And basically, the entire show was changed from what was advertised, and almost everyone agrees it was a poor show. As was detailed last week, a riot took place afterwards, first in the building, then outside the building. At one point, when they were leaving the arena, rowdy fans started pounding on the rental car driven by Charles Skaggs, who we know as Flash Funk, and Charles Wright, who we know as Kama Mustafa. They got out of their cars, which nearly started an incident that would have benefited nobody. As it turned out, they were talked by other wrestlers into getting back into their car and leaving the area. Michaels and the company needed a police escort to get out of the parking lot. All in all, about 13 arrests, mostly for misdemeanor alcohol charges, including several who were underage and another for disorderly conduct. Do you remember having scary situations like that where you're trying to leave the arena in your car and the fans are all over you?
That night in Buffalo when I wore the Y-check jersey, I forget who was with me because they were blocking our car because we were parked where they dumped the Zamboni. Anyway, I don't know who's with me. He goes, "Hey, let me get out and move these fans." I said, "Sit your ass down. That's the last thing you want to do. Just back up and we got to get security over there." Mexico to me still is the I don't know, best story. The craziest story was me and Karen, the heat would build and we were going down there on a regular cadence and the heat was building and building and building month after month after month. And this arena had, however it was left, you had to open this gate, but people hung out there and there were food trucks and merch stands. And it was just kind of a congestion, all that. And I remember getting to the building because the security would come pick us up at the hotel and arriving at the building. And I said, "Okay, are you driving us out tonight?" He said, "No, you're going out another way." So they had a decoy for a car and we went out completely the other side of the building. And Mexico, multiple times, we had to kind of figure out, hey, let's run a decoy, wear a hood up, not a mask, but a hoodie or whatever it may be. Just got to be careful. Several times. I believe on this night, if I remember correctly, they didn't just have to get Shawn and them escorted out of the building. I believe the cops followed them out quite a ways, and one group of officers or whatever said, "We'll be with you until we know we've lost everybody." And I think they went, I don't know, 8-10 miles at a high speed, and then Shawn and Hunter went on about it. But you just never know. But Mexico to me, and then Puerto Rico's another set of circumstances that you just had to be on the lookout. When we did that deal with Ray Gonzalez for the NWA title, and we did a screw job finish ref, where our good old buddy Jeremy Borash came in the stripes and counted Ray out. That was some serious heat that they said, "Hey, let's figure out a way out of here. Get your bags and we're going to go in another direction." So, as a heel, as a performer, you're like, all right, we've done our job and we've really connected emotionally. But then on the safety side, like Karen, until she experienced it once or twice, she was like, Jeff, I will never come back here. What in the hell are we doing? I said, it'll be okay. Be safe. That's why we're taking these precautions. So